technical elements of our RTA Next plan. So today will be quite a bit of education, I think, in what the CAC has previously acted on and the things that we'll be discussing as we continue our conversations here. So to begin with, on our agenda, we have approval of our previous meeting, being the January 23rd meeting. I have a motion. I'll second. Moved by Edmund, second by Dale. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Very good. Any opposed?
One abstention.
And I
Two-
abstain as well.
I
two
abstain.
abstentions. 4 abstentions. Ava, you're abstaining as well.
All right.
Rachel Wilson abstaining.
With those who are abstaining, please use your raise hand function and or raise your hand here. All right, I have abstentions from Amanda Moss, Rachel Wilson, and Abby Okren.
Ava Romero too. I don't know. I'm having problems with my Zoom window.
Okay, thank you, Ava.
Thanks.
Ava also abstains. All right, item 3 on our agenda is submitted public comments, and we got a ton of public comments over the past 2 weeks. Those are very welcome, and since I'm not going to be able to read all of those today, I wanted to at least summarize what we've been hearing from the public, and more than encourage, strongly encourage members of the CAC to get in and read those. In the printout I have here today, it's about 8 pages of fairly small type. So give yourself some time and be sure to read through those. But for the most part, focus has been on the very thing that we're beginning to discuss here, the categoricals. So discussion about transit, maintenance. We're also seeing quite a bit of reporting from members of the transit connections focus group, and many of those comments have to do with these same transit and roadway safety questions, speaking specifically about reducing speeds and protecting bicyclists and pedestrians through this RTA Next plan. So as I said, please, members of the committee, read those comments. Oh, when they'll be on our website and posted later today, tomorrow.
As soon as possible after the meeting.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, to answer Carolyn's question, there was approximately 40 comments. 40?
Sure. Did you ask? You get it first. All right. And thank you to the many folks who also participate, at least from their homes, in our meetings by listening on our YouTube channel. We appreciate that, and your comments are always welcome. All right, we'll move on to kind of the meat of our meeting today, the RTA.
One question, follow up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see the hand up. Is that Ava? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, where do we go to read the comments? Could somebody like share a URL with us or a path or something? I'm not sure where to go to read the public comments.
Mr. Chair, Ava, the public comments are received 1 hour prior to the meeting. So they will get posted after the meeting and they'll be posted on the CAC website. And we'll send out a link in this meeting.
Yeah, that would be helpful to get a link. Thank you.
Sure. And then
Patricia.
Yeah, if it's possible or if it's available, I'm wondering if we could get a little more substantive summary of the comments. There being 40 of them, I feel like people wrote in, so that they could influence or at least get their points across to influence this conversation that we're about to have. So I would love to hear a little bit more about kind of the themes and takeaway points, if anyone's had the chance to read through some or most of them.
Yeah, unfortunately, because of the deadline placed so close to the start of our meeting, about the best that staff could do for us was compile them and make a hard copy for me to leaf through. And I spent the 20 minutes or so before the meeting looking through them and tried to do the best I could in that short amount of time. But I certainly even haven't had a chance to read all of those comments. So we'll endeavor in future meetings to take a look at all of the meeting minutes or all of the submitted comments prior to the meeting in enough advance that I can give you a decent summary. I apologize for the brevity of this one. We'll do better next time. And then I think there will still be a lot of comments received day of, and those are going to be very difficult for us to compile. So appreciate the feedback on that. All right, let's move on then to our to an update on our development process.
thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just going to be a brief update on where we are with the RTA Next Plan before you get to dive into the categorical element discussion today. So as you know, at your last meeting on January 23rd, you approved a recommended list of named roadway multimodal projects for RTA board consideration. And again, I want to commend the committee for a great job in the discussion and being able to move forward the list of named roadway projects. Today, we'll begin the categorical discussion, and then on Wednesday, the 8th, the TMC is going to review the CAC recommended name project list. And what they'll do is have their discussion and then provide additional technical feedback as needed. So the iterative process on the name project list has not stopped. It's continuing. But again, the focus for this committee today will be the categoricals. And then I just wanted to let you all know that we are scheduling a CAC Transit Element Subcommittee meeting on February 13th. The packet should be going out hopefully later today for that meeting, and that will be held from 3 to 5, and it's going to be hybrid, so it'll be in person and remote as well. So more notice will come either today or tomorrow. And then just in terms of, what we want to do is have this categorical sub-elements finalized by the end of this month or early March, so that these recommendations can move forward to the RTA board. And then just to review the milestones that we're still currently working on, to our knowledge, they haven't changed. The RTA board meeting is scheduled to meet later this month. I don't have an exact date yet, but for now, we're going to continue to develop the final cost estimates for the recommended name projects by March. And then in May, the RTA board will finalize all the policy considerations, implementation periods, non-RTA funding sources, those kinds of things. And then also in May, this committee will fine tune the draft plan, the elements and sub-elements that you'll be discussing today. And also you'll be discussing any carryover projects and any new projects to match the budget that the RTA board will provide for you. And then of course, July 1st is still the deadline to complete the draft plan review and recommend an initial draft plan to the board.
Taki, a question. On that first bullet, the RTA staff is developing the cost, or is each jurisdiction of the RTA?
Oh, thanks for asking. No, that's staff. Staff has consultants that they're working with.
Okay.
And then just continuing on with the milestones, and by August, we're hoping that the RTA board will review and approve the draft plan for the public. And then what we want to have is an extensive public review of the draft plan and feedback between August and October of this year. And then between October and December, final plan revisions that you'll receive based on the public feedback. And then hopefully the board will establish an election date for voter consideration. So again, these may change, but these are still the milestones we're working on. And this was also in the memo that you received in your packet.
Bruce.
Mr. Chair, given the significance of what's supposed to happen on July the 1st, where we really, I guess, come to our final recommendation, it would seem to me that that would be a meeting that really should be accessible for public participation. And I would suggest maybe we look at an early evening meeting for that, given the significance of that to the entire community. So that would just be my recommendation for consideration.
I love that idea, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
Sounds good.
On that point, sorry, this is Rachel Wilson. I have to leave because it's the middle of the workday, and we've requested many times that our meeting not be in the middle of the workday. So I have to go, even though I've been begging for the categories to be on our agenda for an entire year. So I really wanted to be here for this. I've worked for a year to get it on the agenda, and now I have to leave.
Thanks for letting us know about that, Rachel. And it's really unfortunate that you're going to miss this, but be sure to tune back in to the tape and listen to it. Reach out with any questions you have after listening to that. And good luck the rest of the day. Okay. By the way, Rachel did send me an email with some comments that I will read when we get into the categoricals.
Mr. Chair, so this presentation, I'm done with this presentation. If there are any questions, and we can move on to the next.
Yeah, any questions for Pocky? Bruce?
I'm sorry, I noticed that at one point we're talking about, I guess, March, RTA will develop final cost estimates, and so that's going to be a staff presentation. I just want to know if those are going to fall within the guidelines of the dollar allocations that Mr. Feeney gave us in his memo. It's different areas and categories.
Well, they'll be estimating the named projects. Yeah, so that'll give us information about we're assuming at this point, based on the high inflation that has impacted the construction industry over the past several years, that those comments or those estimates will be substantially higher than the ones that we've based our initial list on. And so we'll be needing to review those against our list and probably, in my view, remove a few projects from that initial draft list that we have sent to the board.
So as we get into the categoricals, will there be a similar set of cost estimates provided for categorical projects as we move through this process? Because it seems like it's a very compressed period of time for us to have those kinds of discussions.
So we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next item, but the categoricals will typically be buckets as we've described them. They'll have sub-elements that will compete for some of that money. So as we do let me start over. The approach of projects is not exactly the way that we have traditionally done the categoricals. We've recognized that the categoricals may have numerous projects. As an example, one of the sub-elements of the transit and safety categories last time was bus pullouts. And there have been how many now? Over 200.
Coming up on 200 with the categories, with the big roadway project adding to that.
Yeah, and then roadway projects have also added a number of those. So those were not put on the ballot for for voters to look at 200 bus pullouts, obviously, and that would be the same, I think, this year, this time around. Some of these categoricals are also going to change dramatically, in the next 10 years, let's say, as there's a development of technological, apps that may impact how we're doing things. So we won't know which projects will actually be done, how they'll be done in many cases in these categoricals. So we'll be looking to provide funding and a process for selecting projects and programs as we go through this process. So the final plan should let voters know how it is that projects will be selected out of those categoricals.
And will then the CAC be asked to provide any, I guess, guidance or principles or sort of values that go with that process so that there's some guidance to us? For example, transit projects, and it can go everything from neighborhood transit to regional fast buses to Martin streetcar. I mean, do we have any opportunity to provide insight or guidance into how that is structured, or is staff going to bring us back the process or the criteria that are going to be used in how categoricals will be handled under the plan?
Great question. Hold that till the end of the next item particularly, but the answer is yes. We'll all of that is open to us. We'll be looking at the categoricals both for content and whether or not they should even be included and whether any are missing. And so we'll do all that and make that as part of our recommendation to the board. That was
not me.
announcing the next item on our agenda.
And now we present the RTA next categorical elements. So as you all know, there are 4 elements in the RTA: a roadway, safety, environmental and economic vitality, and transit element. Again, thank you to your discussion last week. The roadway element has been complete for now, and we're going to focus on the next 3. So when the CAC met back in 2019, they approved the RTA next elements and sub-elements for roadway, safety, environmental, economic vitality, and transit. So for the 4 I just mentioned, for the future RTA plan development. And they did this knowing that there'd be an option to add or remove any sub-elements, where necessary on any of those categoricals. So again, nothing was set in stone. It's just that the CAC wanted to move forward to say, let's use what we have, and then we'll see what we can do. And in your packet, you received the sub-element that were approved by the CAC, that were adopted by the CAC back in 2019. And then, as you know, last year, the RTA board established the budget parameters for each of the categoricals. So for the 3 that we're going to be talking about today, we've got 170 million for the safety element, 110 million for the environmental and economic vitality element, and then 510 million for transit. So we're going to start off with the safety sub-element. We're going to do one at a time, and we're going to go through each sub-element. And we also have staff available in case there are any questions that we can help to answer. But the safety sub-element has the safety element has 5 sub-elements. The first one is intersection safety and capacity improvement. The next one is elderly and pedestrian safety improvements. The third one is transit corridor bus pullouts. The fourth one is at-grade railroad safety bridge efficiencies. And then the fifth one is signal technology upgrades to improve intersection and traffic flow. So starting off with the first sub-element of safety, the intersection safety and capacity improvements. This information, by the way, was pulled from the current RTA administrative code and then incorporated to match the adopted sub-elements of the CAC approved in 2019. So when we're talking about the intersection safety and capacity improvement sub-element, we're looking at intersection improvements, specifically design and construction for those intersections that have significant congestion and safety issues. One of the things that is critical here is that candidate locations are linked to regional corridors. That's identified by the transportation plans in both the RTA and PAD. And then these improvements will be to the intersections that are not included within the roadway improvement element. This is separate from that. Questions on this?
Just out of comment, can we have a couple, or do we have a couple, 3 examples from the last go round? I know. I remember Grant and Craycroft intersection was widened. I know there's been a number of more outlying intersections that had special treatments added, like out on the periphery, or left turn lanes were added, right turn lanes were added, etc. And the projects, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the projects, as we've gotten later into it, have become less grandiose than the original Craycroft and been more functional, smaller projects, related areas. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Mr. Calvert, that's a great question. We are going to be providing examples of projects as we move forward. Today's presentation is just more of a high level, but if you do need examples, I can call on staff to provide any if you need to have one specifically.
I just for people's knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea if we could get 1 or 2 just examples first to have in our head about how these go. Rick, do you remember any of those that were specific to this? Because I know many of them have already been completed. Farhad will remember, I'm sure.
I was gonna say, I mean, there were a bunch of them, I think at the time. La Cholla Overton seems to stick out in my mind as an intersection improvement that was, I think originally maybe stop control, and this is prior to the 4-lane roadway project coming through. So in the 10 to 15 years in between, that could have been one. I don't remember all of them. That's the kind of the downside of the categorical items is it's meant to cover everything else that's out there. You have probably 20 named projects that we've completed or segments on it, yet we're closing in on 1,000 completed projects. That gives you an idea of the magnitude of how much categorical work there really is. So Dale, I'm afraid I would remember them if I saw a list of them. There's probably some that are just not jumping out at me. And if Pocky's able to generate a list, we can go back and look at the archives of what we've completed, what we've done, and certainly bring forward examples of this.
Farhad, do you want to?
Yeah, not much to add to that, but a good recommendation. We'll follow up with a list of projects already completed, just as example. But again, just to get a perspective, the range of those projects can be anywhere from, a $300,000 improvement all the way up to a $4 million intersection complete reconstruction. So just kind of have that in the back of your mind that as we select those projects, they vary in size and scope and obviously cost.
That ties into Bruce's comment that as you're doing this, why we wouldn't estimate each one. It's a bucket of money that covers the allocation. We'll probably be able to give you an averaging of kind of what you could see, taking to what Farhad's point, the bandwidth of the small, simple, easy ones, all the way up to the more complex and involved.
But clarification.
Go ahead, Carol.
But the named projects that we've heard about already that have these kind of improvements in them is modernization and this, that, and the other. Those elements aren't coming out of this. This is above and beyond, just to make sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is outside of that roadway element. So if whatever the endpoints of the roadway project elements that you've identified, everything inclusive of that will be addressed and brought up to its necessary, fully functional aspects of it. Drainage, bike ped maneuver, or bike ped facilities, transit if warranted, intersections. That's all part of the overall corridor analysis that's planned on all that. And the idea is that all deficiencies are addressed. May not be addressed equally. Doesn't mean it's a cut and paste. Not every intersection is going to get the same exact treatment. So some intersections are more congested than others. Others may need a more safety oriented, but each one will be fully incorporated within that roadway aspect.
So just to follow up, so did you say transit? If there is a roadway that is going to be built with a transit element, it's not coming out of the transit category?
No, what I meant is, so there are some of the routes, and we ran into this on the current plan, where there's no transit routes planned on that. So there were no transit facilities that would have been incorporated. Now we try our best to, well, is there something that could potentially be coming in the next year or two? Then we'll make sure we incorporate that as appropriate. Or in some cases, 5 years later, I had to go back and do a retrofit and add that aspect into it. So it's only if those routes are on there, if that facility demand generator for the fully functionality is necessary, that's included as part of that roadway improvement project. Does not spill into this category to grab it.
Okay, I have a few comments. Go ahead, Aki.
That was, no, this is it. Patricia,
Okay.
Arlen, and Amanda.
Yeah.
And I've actually had to.
So we have Patricia, and then Arlen, then Amanda, and then Abby. Okay, Patricia, you're on deck.
Thanks. Thanks. I was hoping somebody could explain how capacity improvements for intersections relates to safety, and why safety funding should be used to increase roadway capacity. As I understand, looking at data that I've seen, automobile capacity, especially when it increases speeds, is actually at odds with what is safe for people commuting through any type of mode, including in cars. So I'm just curious as to why this particular capacity improvement piece is in the safety element.
I will take a stab at it. I can tell you that capacity is not just vehicular. So if it's lacking pedestrian facilities, bike facilities, that could all be wrapped into that whole assessment of, is it performing in an adequate way? Is there deficiencies out there? What are those deficiencies? And generally an intersection will be deficient in multiple categories or multiple performance functions, maybe is a better way to say that. So you're correct, Patricia, in that all those are going to be taken into account. It's very rare that you can take an intersection upgrade and just isolate that one aspect of it and say, it's only purely that. It'll be underperforming in several areas.
I think your comment maybe has a follow-up conclusion that at least as you've expressed it previously, and I'll take a stab at this, if a project is congested but doesn't have significant safety issues, it won't rise to the level of being included in one of these sub-element improvements. Is that something similar to what you're saying here, Patricia?
I'm not really sure how that answer allays my fears. I'm not seeing anything in this language here, like these bullet points, that speaks to any safety of multimodalities or any of those finer points that you're getting into. So I would feel a lot more comfortable if we were discussing it in that way and actually naming it, as opposed to saying capacity improvement and congestion, which are usually terms linked with automobile traffic.
Okay, thanks. Arlen.
Specific to this.
So this category is.
Hey, Arlen, we can't hear you online.
I just yield, lean into this.
That's great. Thank you.
You can also pull it off, Arlen. It'll disconnect.
So this is intended to be, it could be intended to be a safety issue that just impacts automotive or vehicle, motor vehicle, or it could be multimodal, or it could be the real issue with the safety improvement is the bike path or lack of thereof, or a pedestrian situation. It could be any of those things.
That's how I read it and interpret it, and that's how I think I've utilized it too, is if you're underperforming in the safety arena at an intersection, and it's very unlikely it'll be in just one aspect. Usually the intersection's fully overloaded, vehicular, and every other mode is suffering in some degree or some extent of that. It's a chance to bring that improvement, a chance for this funding to be eligible for it, so that all those deficiencies and underperforming areas can be addressed.
And then the second question, this is a more global, with all of these different categorical elements and sub-elements, is it possible for multiple buckets to be tapped to do one spot on the ground? Or is it, if once you're, let's say you're doing it under this intersection safety and capacity improvement bucket, you're not going to be able to tap another bucket in a categorical that accomplishes something relative to that intersection, or you can?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm
It could be
I'm
multiple.
positive that many of these projects that we've seen on the street have tapped multiple buckets of money, or have been included in several of the different safety elements.
Or as another alternate to that way, there may be a project that addresses intersections, a separate project that addresses the bus pullouts. So rather than combining them into one job, it may be more advantageous for the local jurisdiction to say, I'll create two separate jobs, two different buckets of money, still within the interface of the same corridor.
Yeah, as an example,
there's flexibility, I guess.
As an example, you have contractors who are doing bus pullouts, and they're focusing on that, specializing in that, and you may have a signal improvement, as Rick says, that generates the need for the bus pullout, and you would add in that second contract then with the specialist to do that.
I think the intent is to leave as much flexibility as the jurisdictions would need.
Thank you. And then the third question, which is also overarching, is there any also possibility that one of the named projects, they need some money to do something relative to one of these guys, intersection safety, capacity, or something that didn't get covered in that named project? Could that categorical be tapped to do that with a named project? Or are they considered two separate things?
Well,
their intent
it
to be
would sort of depend, I think, on timing. If that need emerged after the first project was completed, then you would, likely use a categorical to fix that, or to add that need that emerged later. If it was something you knew about going into the initial major project, you would include it in that project. I would feel. Rick, does that make sense?
That's correct. So if you've got when the design effort comes through on the major roadway name projects, it's all inclusive. You're looking at all those aspects of it. Now, a period 4 job may have a intersection or crossing issue that's well in advance of that. And that's happened. Okay, we'll focus on that. It's that one and only issue with a very high intensity, quick fix type of thing. Or as Tom said, after the fact, something generated. The exception that I can think of right off the top of my head is when the wildlife linkages. That is an injection separate above and beyond because that's discretionary money. It's not a regulated aspect. So where there's value to be added and the existing roadway project can be enhanced with the wildlife funds. So that's a separate one. We tap into that category and say, we want to augment the facility and the capability of it for permeability. We recognize that. We'll want to bring that in and add it to the project, and we'll dip into that second set of funds.
But as a general rule.
As a general rule,
You wouldn't, you might, the timing, it's two different projects, but it's not just, we can do more with this one project if we got some of the categorical money. And
the intent that we're going to estimate to set the stage for the delivery by the jurisdictions is that's all inclusive.
Okay.
That roadway project is fully loaded. That's a Rick phrase. It's got all the necessary functional elements. It's got all the cost in there. It is going to be all set up and configured so that all those deficiencies, underperforming areas that are known can be fully addressed.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Rick, just to comment on that, there was one project that if it were in there, Twin Peaks, Rattlesnake Pass, it came in as a named project with wildlife crossings in it. So that would fall under the category of fully loaded, and it would not come out of this budget if it were on our list, correct?
That's correct. If that's a feature, and that's a good distinction. So if a project feature, it happens to be known, happens to be identified well in advance, and can incorporate and say those features are part of what the jurisdictions and the TMC members submitted, then yes, that's included as, and that would be estimated to make sure that project is fully loaded properly.
Good point. That was helpful. Thank you. Next, we have a question from Moss. Hand went down. She got tired.
Oh, no, I'm here. I think that was just whoever's managing the lowering hands. You know, I have great stamina on speaking, Tom, so never worry. Yeah, so I think I liked the question that Patricia raised. I think one thing that was coming to mind looking at these is my understanding is these are largely the same as what we had in 2006 for RTA 1. And, you know, I think we've been inundated with the news lately about how our roads are the least safe they've ever been, you know, and continuing to break records as far as traffic incidents and pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities. So I'm really curious to examine this and potentially even talk about increasing the budget. I'm not sure that 7% really addresses a pressing community need. And I think, you know, it's similar to what Patricia was noting with this capacity improvement. I guess I'm confused on how relieving automobile congestion helps improve the safety for other modes. Pretty much everything I've seen is like when cars are going slower, people are safer. And so I think if we're talking about capacity for bicyclists and pedestrians and not automobiles, then I think I want to have that specifically noted in this element that if we're focusing on improving the movement for bicycles and pedestrians, that's the capacity improvements that we're talking about. And then specifically for design, like what does this even mean to improve the safety of an intersection, for example? I think that we really need to anchor that clearly into what that looks like. You know, there's, even if it's a reference to the NACDO design guide, which has been out for over a decade now, that talks about how do you improve specific safety elements and has specific design standards, and pointing towards that as communities. These are essentially the things that if you want to tap into these funds, you're going to have to demonstrate how you're integrating these types of safety elements into this. Because I don't want it to be we're making this intersection bigger and adding, you know, all these other elements, and it still takes, you know, a pedestrian a minute to cross, and leaving them really exposed in the crosswalk for some kind of incident. So.
Okay. Yeah, great. And that's in the theme of the comments that we've been hearing so far. And I want to remind everyone, we're looking at the RTA next categoricals that were established by this committee with the knowledge that we're going to tear it apart and put it back together. I would like for us to get through these explanations, this kind of teaching, if you will, about what each of the sub-elements currently is looking to be. And if we have changes from that that are going to be needed, I think it's only possible to do that in the context of seeing the entire element together. As we just saw on the previous slide, there are currently 5 sub-elements. We need to see what each of those is, see where these concerns that people have fall, and then tweak each of them and or add or subtract as necessary in order for the whole safety element to look the way that we want it to look. So let's recognize that we need to see all of these sub-elements explained to us, and then take a closer look at how this might fit together. Last comment here is Abby before we move to the next sub.
Yeah, and Patricia and Moss are transportation professionals. I'm just a neophyte, but congestion and safety don't belong together. And so I want to make sure that we are memorializing that we'd like to propose a change to that. And I want to know what the process is, because I just see these as extremely counter purpose. So when do we get to revisit this and just remove congestion from this sub element or propose that? Do I have to make a motion? Are we going to revisit this
No,
together?
it's recorded for sure.
Okay, so moving
Yeah,
on
let's move on.
with the intersection safety and capacity improvements. Additional issues around this is one of the things that this sub-element does is it identifies candidates for the intersection improvement program. And Dale, this kind of goes with what you were saying, asking for an example that we can have, but it's based on intersection delays, it's based on accident rates, and then it's based on both capacity and safety criteria. The project cost for this sub-element it usually includes design, right-of-way, and construction. The actual costs of the intersection improvements do vary, and it just depends on the work to be done. And you're going to see this statement across all the sub-elements. And for this one, the average estimate was about 3 million.
And that's based on what we've been seeing in RTA 1.
Correct. And then, of course, the implementation period for this was all 4 implementation periods of the new plan. So,
yeah, I wanted to point that out as people are talking about these elements, these categoricals. If a major project is going to be in phase 4, that is years 15 through 20, more or less, of the implementation process, then some may not be able to wait that long for needed improvements, such as intersection improvement or bus and ped fixes that would happen, but not for 15 or 18 years. And so keep that in mind, that some of those projects will be immediately known, because a major project that would take care of it isn't going to happen for 15 or 20 years, and that's too long for us to wait. So that's kind of how these categoricals help fill those gaps, and then also react to new projects that pop up, sometimes as a result of shifting traffic or induced demand, or whatever the process might be that changes conditions, including, as I mentioned before, technology changes.
and then
Just a question. I mean, then in that case, if 15 years is too long, they would be borrowing money from this element. And then when their project is due, it would be taken off the top of theirs. I mean,
No, I don't think it works that way.
It typically doesn't. No, it's a standalone project that's got a lifespan of that. Trying to recognize that if it's going to be out there for 10 or 15 years, we don't want to invest too much throwaway. So an example would be a hawk signal. Okay, that's going to be just the hawk crossing, bare minimal. So that's going to be out there until the big main roadway project comes along, widens it out, then can replace that and do the full upgrades with all the other pedestrian appurtenances, all the other connectivity aspects of it that are needed.
But you're saying that the Hawk would have been included in the budget of that plan, but you're doing it up front.
Mm-mm.
Typically, the ultimate Hawk would, yes, it'd be designed for that full. So if we're taking a 2-lane roadway and going to a 6-lane. So that's going to be included. That'll be configured in there. We're going to try to do our best for estimating on that. But the interim measure to buy us some time on that to address a pressing safety need, that's going to be a separate standalone. There aren't too many of those. It's just rare occasions where we've got a hot button issue or a hot spot is what we like to call it. It needs to be addressed before the big main roadway corridor comes through.
Sorry, one more thing. So that, if that's the case, that those few and far between should maybe be put in the first implementation period, if we already know that. But that's,
It's a good thought, and I think that could be added and juggled and balanced with the rest of the pressing need, the complexity of trying to do it, the fiscal balancing. It's a lot of art and science combined. So I think that's a good point. And I think that was where it was trying to, hey, if we have urgent safety issues, congestion issues, multifunctional issues, that may lend it to be at an earlier priority project as opposed to one that can come later in the game, depending on those type of circumstances and how they evolve.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that as we get into implementation periods later on and recognize things like having to borrow through a bonding process or, collecting enough money to pay as you go may take us 3 years at the beginning to get enough money for a project. So those are all elements that have to be addressed later. Go ahead, Paki.
And then, Mr. Chair, just to wrap up, every sub-element at the end, I'll do the benefits. Maybe I should put it at the beginning, but it's at the end for now. So the benefits of this one is to reduce the congestion and increase safety at major regional intersections. Give you an overview. So the next safety sub-element is the elderly and pedestrian safety improvements. And what these do is they identify, design, and construct necessary pedestrian-related improvements. And this is along major roadway corridors. These improvements include bridges, tunnels, and a variety of the at-grade signalized crossings that some of you have been discussing. And then, of course, the Americans for Disability Act access improvements, which includes the wheelchair ramps, completing, the sidewalks, any missing small segments, and then elimination of any barriers to the bus stops. This sub-element also has a project cost that includes design and right-of-way and construction. Again, the per project cost varies. For this one, it's approximately $250,000 per signalized crosswalk. And the implementation is all periods of the plan.
When you
And-
say signalized crosswalk, we're not talking about a hawk.
A hawk is a very specific variation of a signal. So it's under the general umbrella. There are iterations there's bike hawks, toucans. I will not bore you to tears with all the nuances of that. I've been learning as I go along, but under the umbrella of signalized intersections,
Okay.
not the intersection, the major one. These
Got
are
it.
the specialized separate ones.
So new signalized crosswalks.
No.
Got it.
And then the benefits for this, of course, it has become, and you've all been hearing about this, more difficult for pedestrians to access and cross safely and efficiently. And this is because of the congestion in arterial roadways and the traffic of the region is increasing. Also, of course, pedestrian crossings are needed at key locations along major roadways, especially near major activity centers, shopping centers, medical centers. And then the ADA accessibility improvements are needed to improve the corridor access for people with disabilities in addition to elderly.
So
Let me get a comment in here from Moss, then Patricia and Arlen. Go ahead, Moss.
thank you. I was just looking back at our guiding principles and just kind of thinking through how we're making sure that those come through and as we revise and these categorical elements. And one thing, especially related to pedestrian safety, that I think I see is missing here are, traffic calming measures and, reducing the distance. I know that hawks can provide, or toucans can provide technically, reduced distance for pedestrians, but I think that we need to be looking at overall, like how do we reduce that crossing distance for pedestrians at intersections, and have those traffic calming measures so that cars are not just barreling through intersections, and have that more of awareness and attention. So I think integrating some of these in there, and then bringing through too that the main way that we talk about reducing and managing congestion in our guiding principles are strategies like travel demand management and intelligent transportation technologies. So like to see that more explicitly spelled out so that we're in alignment with these guiding principles. Thank you.
Patricia, then was it Arlen?
Cool, thanks. I just wanted to say that I don't think it's car congestion that makes it unsafe for people to cross. First of all, I'd like to push back a little bit on that. And then in general, I think this element could use a lot of beefing up, and maybe this is, kind of the sub-element, the umbrella under which we can do it. But I would love to see some discussions about speed management. We know that vehicular speeds are the top determinant of fatalities. Of if a crash that does occur is going to be fatal or is going to be, seriously injure someone. So I think if we're talking about safety, especially of pedestrians, we should be talking about speed. I think Mosh just mentioned traffic calming. We could think about reducing or narrowing car lanes. I mean, there's, tons of data-driven interventions that we could be making here. Would be happy to share out articles and information if staff is willing to spread that around to the CAC. And then also, dedicated and protected infrastructure for bicyclists, for transit, for people walking is another sub-element that I think really fits in here.
Okay, thanks. And we have Arlen.
Yeah, thank you. So like everything else that we're doing, pretty much we're talking about regional arterial roadways that we're getting. There may be some exceptions to that, but it's part of the regional system that we're looking at. In these types of pedestrian crossings, they may take a significant amount of construction, or it may be some of the things that Ross mentions. But the question, I realize now, we call this elderly and pedestrian safety improvements. Really, these are pedestrian safety improvements. We're calling out elderly, a special case, and probably with good reason, voting public as well as the traditional population, higher older folks in Tucson. But I'm thinking that one of the things to consider is that we might also want to call out, as we do in just the last bullet in front of us, is folks that are disabled in the title. You could have a very long list: elderly, disabled, small kids, whatever, but dogs, whatever, but any specialty group. But I think in this day and age, elderly and disabled at minimum probably ought to be called out.
Okay, moving on with the next sub-element is the bus pullouts, and these are identified, designed, and constructed along major transit corridors where the buses are known to delay traffic flow on a regular basis. I think most of you have seen how they work. For this sub-element, the design of the pullouts is standardized to accommodate the full-size 40-foot buses. And then the design of the pullouts is for 60-foot articulated buses and are multiple buses that should be considered along high ridership corridors.
Go ahead, Ed.
Bus pullouts are designed to make personal automobiles move faster, not to improve pedestrian safety, not to improve automobile safety.
Hey, Abby, we can't hear you online. Sorry.
Sorry, I said I'm contesting that bus pullout should be in this category. I think that they're designed to make it faster for automobiles, which Patricia just pointed out is the #1 indicator of car fatalities and crashes, both for cars and for pedestrians. And this doesn't make transit faster. It doesn't make it safer for pedestrians. I was actually just looking at the Grant and Euclid intersection, where I theoretically have made a bus connection before by crossing a super deadly widened intersection where I almost get hit by people obeying all the laws. So I don't know why bus pullouts are here. I think bus pullouts are a gift to personal automobiles and not to safety or transit. And I would ask that this be removed from this category altogether.
Well, they certainly are a safety sub-element, and they're on their own. They're not intended to indicate that they improve the safety of every element.
But what do they improve the
So-
safety of, Tom? I mean, cars having to slow down isn't dangerous. Cars speeding up is dangerous. So I don't see how this is a safety
Yeah,
improvement. I'd like to see this study.
I would disagree, and I think all the almost all of the city and town folks would also disagree. But
Actually, I've heard a lot of, I
we'll
attended
get-
a couple.
excuse me, Moss, just a second. I'll get to you. But at this point, again, we're looking at how this was set up. The committee can discuss what we want to see and what we don't want to see. If we don't want bus pullouts anymore, if we don't think they're needed, I think with some feedback from other constituents, we can make that decision when the time comes. But I think today is not going to be a day where we can do that. Thank you for putting it on the table, though, and it'll certainly be something that we talk about. But I think at this point, we're not going to take a motion. I'm not going to take a motion for us to pull it completely out of RTA next.
Just Tom, all I was going to add is I actually had the
Great.
privilege of
Moss, you are-
attending to.
You are next.
Oh, thank you. I had the privilege of going to a City of Tucson organized field trip to First Avenue, where they were talking about the RTA 1 proposed improvements as well as the kind of alternative design. And all the planners there specifically talked about exactly what Abby just said, that bus pullouts are not safe for any other mode. And it really is just a car convenience thing, and that it actually creates a lot of transit delays and creates a lot of problems for bus users themselves because of these delays. And so I think that what would be really helpful, again, is coming into alignment with what are actually the current best practices for planning and transportation design, which often are radically different. Like, I see a variation in our region about what that belief is, and I think that we really need to make sure that we're putting the most progressive best practices forward, and bus pullouts really don't have a place in this. And in fact, so I wholeheartedly back up Abby's point, and I think there's plenty of evidence to demonstrate how this is really an unsafe aspect to our roadway design.
Yeah, it's a good point. I won't say that I agree with it, but the point you bring up, both of you bring up about current best practices is very legitimate, and it's something that we want to continue to look at. What you're seeing today is essentially RTA Next defined under RTA 1 standard operating procedure. And we're going to see things that we think are not current anymore 20 years later, but we want to get through this so that we see the full picture of and can then say this belongs only in certain areas, and we can get feedback also from those jurisdictions that want or need or don't want and don't need to see whether we're going to include it or not. So let's continue through this, and let's let Taki get through this this category.
So some of the criteria for the bus pullout sub-element is accident frequency, the percent of lanes blocked, time points, number of boardings, high transfer locations, high disabled loadings, proximity to signalized intersections, and right-of-way availability. And then another mention about the sub-element is that it's important to locate pullouts where there's not a negative impact on transit route performance. For example, getting behind the schedule, due to difficulty re-entering traffic flows, that sort of thing. The project cost, again, includes design, right-of-way, and construction. For this sub-element, the average cost is $200,000, depending on right-of-way costs, of course, and then all 4 implementation periods of the new plan. And then, of course, the benefits for this sub-element are that they're needed where public buses stop for long periods of time along major arterials that delay traffic in the through lane. They allow buses to load and unload passengers in a designated K pull-up to the right of the through lane and next to the curb, which is a safety feature. And then, of course, traffic can continue to flow in the through lane and drivers won't need to resort to lane changes to avoid traffic delays behind the stop buses. So
I have a process question. Can I have my hand up?
Is that Ava?
It's Patricia.
Patricia.
Oh, Patricia. Yes.
Yeah, I just have a process question, I guess, about this exercise broadly. It's seeming like this is not the moment that we're supposed to sort of lend our perspectives or provide factual observations about these sub-elements. So I'm just wondering, like, where we're going, at what point we intend to return to this conversation on the CAC. Historically, like, the finer points of what we talk about aren't captured in our meeting minutes. And we did have these sub-elements to review previously. So I'm just wondering, like, what we're hoping to move through and how this is the best use of our time to just learn about what exactly was already laid out for the past 20 years.
Okay. I'll take a shot at that. We are recording and making sure that we have in mind all of the objections, comments, nuances, best practices, holes in the current plan that we can, so that when we do discuss categoricals in detail, in fact, in a few minutes, when we get into the transit portion of this, there will be some comments that we'll forward on for consideration to our subcommittee to bring back to us. In any case, our detailed discussions will include all of these thoughts and more, I'm sure. But in order for us to make sure that everyone on the committee is up to speed on what our baseline is, I think this is important for us to do. Mary?
Thanks, Tom. I think it helps to explain that when the committee came up with these, there was a lot of discussion that took place. I think we went past, I don't know how many meetings, but it went on and on and on, probably for a whole year, that we discussed these, we hammered them out, we had lots of pros, cons, comments, etc. And I think that much dialogue on these by 3/4 of the committee, or maybe 2/3 of the committee, I'm not sure how many new folks we have. I think it's important to give the people who weren't there back then an opportunity to really look at these, think about these, hear what the thought process was behind these, so that then they can digest that and we come back at another time and they can add to it. But they didn't have the benefit of those week after week after week after week of meetings where we really hashed through each and every one of these. So I think it's really helpful right now to do this, just so that our newbies, can get a better idea of what it is that we've done with these in the past. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Mary. Okay, go ahead. Okay.
The next sub-element is the at-grade railroad safety bridge deficiencies. And this is to provide funding for design and construction of existing at-grade highway rail intersection improvements for those intersections that experience congestion and safety issues. And then also for existing roadway, pedestrian, and other transportation bridges that are in need of repairs or upgrades due to the bridge deficiency. So the proposals for improvements to address safety issues of existing at-grade rail intersection or bridges are given the highest priority under the sub-element. The selection of improvement locations is based on safety and other criteria established by the RTA. And also the identification and selection of candidate improvements is done on an ongoing basis to ensure that the upgrades reflect the current needs and are supported by current data. Once again, the costs include design, right-of-way, and construction, and costs of improvements vary. The implementation periods are all 4 in the new plan, and the benefits of this sub-element is to improve safety at grade railroad crossings and bridges. The next sub-element is signalization technology. This addresses the transportation systems performance. And this program actually ensures that the transportation system performs efficiently and as possible, and also during and after construction, project construction as well as possible. The program designs, builds, operates, and monitors traffic signal technology. And this is affiliated with the Region's Intelligent Transportation System, the ITS program. And the ITS program focuses on 4 areas: the traffic signal coordination, which is the delivery of the seamless traffic signal operations across all jurisdictional boundaries. The second one is the transportation systems communications. And this focuses on the establishment of the municipally owned communications network to support transportation, public safety, emergency response, Amber Alert, and Homeland Security efforts that are within the region. The third component is the traveler information. This is the compilation, formatting, delivery of the convenient, comprehensive, and accurate stored in real-time pre-trip and during route information to travelers to help them make informed travel decisions. This also includes any route planning around construction and accidents, which has been very helpful for drivers. And then the information is delivered through multiple sources, as you all know, the roadside message boards, radio, TV, kiosks, the internet, and your smartphone.
Okay, I have a question
Oh, yeah.
first. You've talked on multiple occasions about things like a category or a discussion on technology. Does that cover some or all of it, or is that a total? I've never quite understood exactly what you're talking about with technology. Of course, it changes every day practically, but is this getting at it?
Only a part of it.
Okay.
Traffic signalization is one element of it, but taking into consideration new modes of transportation, use of electronic vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and those kinds of things also have to be taken into consideration. For instance, the notion of using autonomous buses to provide transit would have to have its own element built into the design of roadways and things of that kind. So I know that there's been the city has stressed traffic signalization is one key element of technology. I think that's part of it, but it's not everything. That I would suggest goes into consideration, and that 15 or 20 years out, if the expectation is that we're going to have a very different way of moving around because of technology, we need to take that into account.
Okay, but I guess to follow up, then you could see this definition being expanded to include all those things and maybe more funding, I would think, for it. So, okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Dale.
I would suggest that this is an area where it's kind of moving fairly quickly. And there's developments, and I know both the city and the county have been working on some of these issues, not all of them. That a updated presentation specifically from the city and the county with their traffic facility might be very useful to the committee to understanding what are possible and what are areas that they need. I know both the city and the county are progressing with signal modifications, et cetera, and where they really need additional funds and where problems are there that they're doing. So I'd love to hear from them and the people on the street doing that. I'm sure PAG is involved in that already, but I think it would be good if the committee could hear that.
Yeah, good suggestion. Thank you.
And then the fourth component of this sub-element is the incident and emergency management. And this is, of course, focusing on improvement management of traffic, incident response, recovery through plan development, regional training. This includes all the regional incident management teams, the expansion of regional emergency traffic signal preempt, roadway service patrols, and expansion of the ER Link emergency telemedicine program. Project costs, these of course vary depending upon the extent of the work to be done and would include all 4 periods of the new plan. And the benefits is, by applying the latest technological advances to the transportation, improvements in signalization and technology applications can help meet increased demand. And this is done by improving the quality, the safety, and the effective capacity of the existing and the new infrastructure. Studies have also shown benefits from signalization and technology-based transportation improvements. And these studies have shown the reductions in vehicle delay ranging from 5% to 42% using this technology, and reductions in vehicle accidents of 40%. So that concludes the safety sub-element. I don't know if there are any additional questions on this sub-element.
Abby?
I don't have a question, but I'm just going to point it out again for the record that vehicle delay and safety are frequently butting heads with each other, and I don't think that belongs in here.
Okay, thank you.
Bruce? Yeah, and I'm just gonna sort of take a contrary position. I think safety is safety, safety for autos, for buses, for bicyclists, for pedestrians, and that this category should include the opportunity to address all those kinds of safety concerns. And I would dispute the notion that congestion does not create safety problems. And I'll just give as an example that if you look at Grant Road in Alvernon, which is not a priority project, but a high volume, highly congested area in which the congestion causes huge problems for pedestrians, bus users, and others. And those improvements are all linked to one another. So I would be very much opposed to removing the notion of congestion from this category. I think it's something that needs to be considered. I recognize there are efforts to try to incentivize people to slow down or use alternative modes, and I fully support those, but we have areas in which congestion does create significant safety hazards, and I think eliminating that from this category would be a huge mistake.
Thanks. And that's kind of a preview of our debate that we'll have and probably beginning at the transit subcommittee meeting next week and continuing on for the next few months. Do I have Jamie?
Yeah, I wanted to add, I think we got to look at the whole picture. I mean, we're the Transit Authority Advisory Commission, and it seems like we're so focused on pedestrians, which are important. But if we look at the motor vehicle crashes, it's much higher than any pedestrian incidents and fatalities. I think we have to look at the whole picture. We have to look at everybody that's on the road, cars, pedestrians, bicycles, buses, everything. And I think it's just important for us to remember that. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not going to ask a lot of this. I think we're going to have a much longer discussion on this, but I think we need to look closely at our definition for safety sector. Maybe expand that to what was done last time. And I'll just talk about a current case that the city of Tucson's been working on is whether to do a road diet on 5th, 6th Street. And their studies have been somewhat conflicting on safety. Their original intentions were to put in a road diet and make a continuous left turn lane. And they've gotten conflicting information about that from Country Club East to Country Club West. And because of the different configurations and the width of the street, et cetera, they've actually found that there'd be a lot of safety right-hand turn problems if they put in the continuously. So I think we need to put in some clarity in our definitions and some flexibility in our definitions to understand how safety and volume movement can be interrelated. So, and I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay,
Tom.
Moss.
Thank you. I think, just on this topic of congestion and everything, I think so much of that is fundamental to how is everything designed, right? Like Grant and Alvernon, Bruce, to your point, does get congested. I've seen it. It can be annoying to drive through, but you look around and it's just like there's not facilities for these other modes of transportation. And so it's not that cars being able to move quickly through this space is would help to alleviate that. There's just like lack of facilities for every other mode. And Jamie, to kind of your comment, I think that for the last 20 years we've really focused on, and beyond basically since cars were invented, we've really focused on car infrastructure and building that out. And so going back again to our guiding principles, where we made very intentional edits of adding in bicycle pedestrians and others and all these other things, recognizing that there has been inequities in which mode is getting funded is a reason why we're focusing on this now. And just like, again, bringing up Move Tucson and understanding and being in a lot of spaces where City of Tucson voters are talking, they're not interested in improving infrastructure for cars. They want it to be safer for other modes and really focus on that transit and mode switching. And so if we wanted to have, that voter base participate, it's going to be really essential that we keep that at the heart of these conversations. And then, as far as the road diet on 5th, 6th, my understanding is the discussions have had less to do with safety, and again, more about congestion at intersections, and that what these road diets could do. And I think actually digging more into that study that a few engineers did, that really the gap in it was that it was focused on level of service for vehicles, not for other modes of transportation. And so it's also like thinking about what are the metrics that we're using and to describe what are these issues, because we know level service is really outdated and doesn't capture a whole lot of other information about who's using roadways. And so again, more to come.
Hey,
I will just really need to, and if we need to have a presentation about how congestion and safety connect, I think that seems like maybe a wise use, so that we're all on the same page.
Okay, thanks. Jamie?
Yeah, I'd like to address this issue of equity. I did a research on the MAP dashboard. In Arizona, 92.5% of the people have cars. So in the Metro Tucson, that's roughly 1 million people. So that's over 900,000 people have cars. But when I look at the SunTran ridership, we have at most 50,000 people a day. And if that's two-way trips, that's 25,000. So I think we do need to be concerned about equity. I 100% agree with Moss on that one. We got to look at who's going to vote. And I think it's important that we remember that, who our audience is. Thank you.
Thanks.
And just to clarify, I think there's a lot of confusion about what equity means and the way we've talked about it, saying that there's more vehicle owners in the region isn't really what we mean by that topic. It's saying, again, would be looking at where has historically funding gone to and who has been left behind. And that's looking at demographic information, marginalized communities, and also just investment in other services. And we know why there's 92% of our region has a vehicle. It's because it's like literally the only way you could get around in any efficient way, but it's also really expensive. It's bad for greenhouse gases, which is another, all these other things. And so I think we just need to also maybe right size on what we mean by equity. It's not just saying, does Vail have an equal number of projects to Tucson or however that is. It's really about, diversity, equity, inclusion, and making sure our funding isn't leaving populations and continue to divest from certain populations.
Moss, I think we're just getting off topic here. Let's just continue on with these conversations that we've got. Those debates are ahead of us for sure. Go ahead, Mark.
So the next sub-element I wanted to give you a overview on is the environmental and economic vitality element. This one has 3 sub-elements: greenways, pathways, bikeways, and sidewalks is one. The second one is the transportation-related critical wildlife linkages. And the third one is the small business assistance. For the greenways, pathway, bikeways, and sidewalks element, this identifies, designs, and constructs important sidewalk and bikeway improvements along regional roadway and river park systems. Project planning and funding is split into 3 separate and distinct categories. The first one is sidewalks, the second one is shared use path, and the third one is the on-street bike lanes. And then projects in this sub-element are evaluated and prioritized annually. Project costs for this also include design, right-of-way, and construction, and they vary on a project-by-project basis. All 4 periods of the new plan are included in the implementation. And then the benefits of this one is existing roadways throughout Tucson region do not have continuous sidewalks and bikeways. And this program fills the important gaps in sidewalk, shared use, bike lane networks, and it also enhances bike and pedestrian transportation systems for all users. The next sub-element is, more benefits. Sidewalks are needed for a variety of users, especially children and people with disabilities who walk or use public transit for work and for school. It's a well-connected shared use path system along the river park system, which is an important recreational resource for the community. And it's an on-street bike lane facility that offers cyclists a safer environment to regularly commute on major roadways. The next sub-element is transportation-related critical wildlife linkages. And what this does, it provides funding for the design and the construction of wildlife crossing improvements. And this is within future plan roadways and highways. So retrofitting existing roadways and highways with wildlife crossing improvements is the focus for this one. And these improvements include expanded culverts or underpasses, overpasses, fences, and signage, but they're not limited to those items. Project costs also include design, right-of-way, and construction. Costs vary, and implementation periods are all 4 of the new plan. The benefits of having these critical wildlife linkages is Pima County residents have supported expenditure of significant funds to conserve unique natural areas surrounding the Tucson urban metropolitan area. The roadways and the highways act as barriers to the movement of wildlife, isolating existing parks and preserves and contributing to wildlife mortality. By removing these barriers and maintaining wildlife where it exists, it helps to preserve the at-risk animals such as the Sonoran Desert tortoise, the Gila monster mountain lion, black bear, and other amphibians. Improving this wildlife movement throughout the region will further the goals of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan and other local conservation efforts that make roadways safer for both people and for wildlife. And then the third element in this sub-element in this category is the small business assistance. This program focuses on minimizing disruptions to the small businesses that are adjacent to any major RTA roadway construction projects. What they do is they provide assistance on additional signage, they offer information support, and good access planning for businesses. Assistance includes identifying impacted businesses, especially vulnerable businesses. They help to develop signage and accessibility programs. There's a partnership creation that is involved among the businesses, project developers, contractors, and neighbors. Direct business assistance is based on individual project scopes. The Small Business Assistance also provides informational programs that give notices and information to businesses about the projects in advance, and it provides project updates. The business development component leverages other local resources for eligible businesses, and the program does not include direct payments to businesses for the loss of business or tax breaks to affected businesses. Costs are determined on a project-by-project basis, and it really depends on the scope of the project and the extent of the affected businesses for this one. And all 4 implementation periods are included in this. Some of the benefits that have occurred from this program is a large construction program, as you know, has significant impacts on businesses, especially the loss of income due to the lack or the reduction of access for customers. What this program does is helps to minimize the disruptions of roadway construction to the small businesses. That concludes the.
Okay, let's take some comments on this. You want to go back to the initial slide here that shows what the 3 sub-elements are. And we'll start with Patricia's comments.
Thanks. I have a couple of comments / questions. I guess my first question is, why are environmental and economic vitality themes grouped together?
Don't look at me.
You were there.
Yeah.
Is that a suggestion that they not be linked together?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should definitely decouple them, first of all. And I think a lot could be added to the environmental element. Also, in thinking through this, I might even argue, and I think, our guiding principles would back me up on this, but that each and every one of our elements and sub-elements actually directly relates to and should support our climate resilience goals. I feel like it's been said 1,000 times in this committee and we're all living it, but as we all know, we're in the midst of a crisis, environmental crisis, and we will be in the middle of very real challenges, especially in 20 years looking ahead. So I'm just concerned that it's this very small sub-element and it's, being portioned into just a couple of actions when I really think it should be permeating all of our decisions.
Okay, thank you. Mas.
Thanks, Patricia. Good comments. I think specific things, I agree with separating out economic vitality and environment. I think that there's just more ways to maybe drill in and kind of just not let those get all kind of messy and also cannibalize each other in some sense. I think it would be really great to see urban heat island reduction, improving stormwater management as far as runoffs, because that all relates to how, wildlife, if they can link, they still have to drink water and exist in these spaces of pollution. So green infrastructure, which can also tie into traffic calming measures and such like that. So I think there's like some good synergies that could happen there across elements. And then, I think that something huge that's missing here is transportation electrification and providing and thinking about.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, Mas, what did you say?
Transportation electrification. So converting our regional, buses to electric buses and different things like that is part of our greenhouse gas reduction.
Okay, thanks. Joanne.
Hi there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hear a lot of things that I think are really beginning to sound very alarmist, in that we are in a serious and dangerous environmental failure. We are living on a planet that was completely eviscerated at the time of the dinosaurs. And that happened over millions of years. I think to say that we are at some critical point is a little overreactive. And to me, it screams of unnecessary panic. I'm not saying we don't have problems with the climate and our environmental background, but I think we also need to understand that at the end of the day, there is nothing we are going to be able to do on this planet to stop what's going to happen next. And to push that ahead of safety and other issues, I think is just something that we really need to think about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Yeah, actually we have Abby and then Patricia and Dale. Oh, sorry, Arlen and Arlen.
Oh, yeah. I think Arlen had his hand up before me.
I will make this very brief. I've lived here for almost 50 years.
Closer to the mic, please.
I've lived here for almost 50 years. Bruce Wright's former boss, Mo Udall, who I consider to be a demigod in the community. Mo, not Bruce.
I was with you on the Bruce one.
Yeah. One of my many takeaways is that you cannot separate, or you ought not to separate, and there's no reason to separate environmental benefits from economic benefits. You can do both at the same time. They both coexist. One benefits the other. And without getting into any more detail than that, I would strongly oppose separating those two concepts out of this plan.
Okay, thank you. Abby.
I'm echoing, I think, what a lot of people have said, but I do really want clarity on how we're deciding what's an element and what's a sub element, because when we have previously brought up pedestrian infrastructure and safety within the roadway projects, we were told those were separate elements. But now we keep looking at these and congestion keeps popping up, and that's not related to safety. And to Jamie's point earlier, Jamie's speed is also the result of car unsafety. So even just auto crashes, we still need traffic calming measures to make those safer. So I feel like this element keeps getting sidelined, the safety element, and I don't know why this is all shoehorned into the end of it. I am very concerned. And I mean, to Joanne's point, I don't think that any of the changes that we only started talking about an hour and a half into this meeting related to climate change take away from safety. I think that these two things do work hand in hand, but we are dealing with a climate crisis. We do need to be planning for a future that does involve less car driving. And that does involve more electrification, and where our pedestrian infrastructure isn't just better sidewalks in a climate where it's 115 degrees for a month at a time, because we can't walk in this, we can't bike on the blacktop. So I think that the fact that climate change isn't even in here, safety is a side note, environment and economics are pushed together and not being considered into the other projects. I just don't even know what we're supposed to do with this. And I'd like some clarity on that.
Oh, that will have to emerge over time, I'm afraid. Bruce.
Yeah, I'm with Arlen. I'd like to keep these two together, but I am kind of concerned about the narrow nature of what we're calling economic vitality, which is small business assistance. For example, and it's included in our guiding principles, the notion of providing options and alternatives to get to a major workplace seems to me to be a significant issue for the community, and maybe ought to be identified as one of these sub-elements. As an example, we've just attracted a major lithium battery manufacturer, which contributes to electric vehicles out by the airport. Creating park and ride sites and transit links express would be very important to sustaining that effort, but also allowing those folks a different way to get to a workplace. So I'm wondering if we need to add an additional element here. I know that's covered under transit, but I think the recognition that there are significant employment centers that would need assistance might be included.
Well, and we don't know what those employment centers might be 10, 15 years from now. And so perhaps what you're describing is not committing all of the money in this pot to specific projects or types, but rather recognize that there should be some that's available when a new problem or a new opportunity presents itself, such as what you just described, a new express bus route. And I think just within the transit element, I think that's something very important for the transit subcommittee and the full committee to look at. What are the elements of the transit you know, what are the sub elements of the transit elements so that we understand where we might have flexibility for the future and where we can react to those kinds of issues that come up.
And that's exactly my point. I'm not suggesting a designated amount or anything,
Yeah.
but to suggest that that is an appropriate usage of funds under this category is when those opportunities or those requirements present themselves, that they would be eligible for consideration for this kind of funding.
Good. Be sure you continue to champion that as we continue. Go ahead. Dale.
I'm going to say 2 or 3 things to start off. Number one, I don't really think anything that was in this last time really contributed that much to economic vitality to begin with. The small business assistance, I've always thought, even back in 2006, that it didn't belong there, but it was put there just to have some place to put it. Because small business assistance here is referring to aid that is provided by the RTA to smaller businesses that do not have the resources. If I got a franchise operation with 20 locations, I've got resources that if I have a single location pizza house that I don't have. And those people who are running those small restaurants and those small shops, et cetera, do not have the advice and advantage of the larger world that the bigger operations have. And the small business assistance was primarily there to fill in that hole, is to give those small businesses where a roadway is being widened or whatever we're doing in a project. And I can see a transit project having the same impacts. I'm sure the streetcar absolutely had those impacts to help those small businesses plan and survive the construction process. And that was the purpose of that. And so I think it's probably misplaced, but I don't know where else we'd put it. And I think that's why it ended up there in the first place.
You're right.
But I think there's also a benefit of major economic issues that things like work centers, these things that, and when I sat on transit committees, we worried about all the time was, okay, how do we get people to these centers of employment, et cetera? Those are important issues that I think some flexibility would be important. And then the last I'm going to comment, and this is just a comment of, I'm generally probably considered a streets guy, if you want to put it that way. I'm not necessarily, but I want to make it clear that I fully believe that there are environmental problems that we are causing and that there are things we could do differently in society to lessen our environmental problems. And so I just want to be very clear that that's I think we don't want to lob in and say it's not all about environmental, but that there is some things out there that can be done, including maybe putting in some assistance for input of electrical chargers for cars.
All right.
With that said, we'll move on.
Thanks, Dale. Edmund.
Thank you. I thought Dale was right on in regards to the small business assistance. It is uberly important to have in this next RTA. If you see the gentleman back there in the blue shirt with the tie on, he leads the team that gives basically a business consultant to the small businesses that are affected by the widening. We're talking about the widening, we're arguing over green, we're arguing over sidewalks and everything else. Think of the small businesses that are affected as we make these decisions to improve our roadways. Secondly, I just minor history lesson. I've been really quiet this meeting, which is unlike me. And as I sit here, I think about the original RTA CAC that I was on. And the bottom line with that RTA CAC is, as a community, we are very far behind. We should have passed this 50 years ago. We're so far behind. And what I'm sitting here listening to today, we all kind of want the same things. We're just arguing for our piece, whether it's the sidewalks, whether it's the bus lanes, whether it's the bike lanes or bus turnouts. We're all arguing for the same thing. We just have very outdated roads. And there's a best practice. If you look in regards to the road, and Dale, you're a streets guy. If you look at the best practices in regard to what a roadway should look like, it should be multiple lanes. There should be a middle median. There should be bus turnouts. bus pullouts, there should be, bike lanes, there should be sidewalks. Talk about Grant and Alvernon. I mean, it looks like third world country. There's no sidewalks. I mean, you don't have the bus pullouts, and we're arguing safety on bus pullouts. I mean, if I'm an insurance agent, I've owned an Allstate insurance agency for the last 26 years, and I know that pedestrians are being hit by cars in our community. I don't see those claims, but I just read Tim Steller's article. We should be talking about fentanyl in this meeting. I mean, those are half to the pedestrians that are getting hit, and it's so sad. But as an insurance agent, I hear about people killed in car accidents weekly, right? People that are, gosh, I have people that, because there's not a bus pull out, will take a right-hand turn on a street and crash into the back of a bus. I mean, I don't know how they missed the bus, right? But we're just so far behind. So let's all keep that in mind when we debate each other. We're 30 years behind where we should be.
All right. We're going to have a last comment, a quick one from Moss before we move on to the transit element. Want to try to get through each of these elements today. Go ahead, Moss, quickly.
Thanks, Tom. I just want to reiterate, I really don't understand the rationale for coupling environmental and economic vitality, and I haven't really heard of a good reason for why these are so interrelated that they have to go with each one another. And Dale, appreciate the history on just kind of slapping the small business assistance into this because folks didn't know where to go. And I just think that there's a lot more intentional thinking we could do around what would improve in economic vitality that we could put into these sub-elements and then not have to worry about environmental and economic priorities competing with one another. Carolyn, I think like one of the first times I went to the meeting in person, I overheard some side conversation that you were having about how there was concerns about the environmental element not having enough money going into it. And so it's just like, if we're already having issues funding it in RTA 1, like I want to make sure that this is protected because it's so important. And yes, we can have an impact on our climate change and reducing and mitigating and also helping to adapt to those changes. And water is going to be a big thing. Heat's going to be a big thing. And we need to be doing better as far as planning around that. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Becky.
Okay, so moving on to the final element and the one with the most sub-elements is the transit element. The transit element consists of weekday evening bus service, weekend bus service, bus frequency, service area expansion, special needs transit for elderly and disabled citizens, neighborhood circulator, bus systems, and express service. For the weekday evening bus service, most of the transit routes receive expanded weekday evening service to accommodate workers, students, and families who depend on transit for daily commutes. Service until 11 p.m. on most routes and service until 12 midnight on a few routes. By the way, our transit team helped me update some of the information due to COVID, so some of this has been updated. The weekend bus service expansion includes most transit routes receive expanded weekend service. And this is, of course, to improve the mobility for weekend workers and shoppers. Buses operate from approximately 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Saturday and around 7 to 8 on Sunday. For the bus frequency sub-element, the top transit routes receive an increase in bus frequencies during the weekdays to reduce overcrowding during the peak periods. And this improves overall service reliability. So some of the routes are extended to currently unserved areas of the region. Additional bus frequency routes are analyzed and frequencies are enhanced as warranted. So for example, there's improved peak hour frequencies from 15 minutes to 10 minutes. There's improved midday frequency from 15 minutes to 10 minutes. Improved peak hour or midday frequencies from 30 minutes to 20 or 15 minutes, and then improved all-day frequencies from 30 to 15 minutes. For the service area expansion sub-element, the routes are analyzed and extended to cover additional service areas as warranted. So service routes, times, and other features are identified by the RTA in coordination with the transit providers prior to the implementation of this. For the special needs transit service sub-element, The cost of the existing paratransit services is expected to grow by approximately 3% annually to meet future mobility needs of a growing elderly and disabled population. Funding supports existing volunteer-based services for seniors in needs in this category. For the special needs transit service, there are 4 primary agencies that receive RTA special needs funding, and these are Sunvan, which is administered by the City of Tucson, the Sun Shuttle ADA Dial-A-Ride, which is administered by the RTA. Oro Valley operates a paratransit service as part of the Sun Shuttle ADA Dial-A-Ride service, and then there are volunteer-based transport for seniors, which is administered by the Pima Council on Aging. For the neighborhood circulator bus systems, there are new transit circulator services that are provided in communities with limited transit service. There are currently 8 fixed routes and 4 Dial-A-Ride services in the region as of today. These services are intended to provide daily connections to local activity centers as well as to the regional transit system. The service routes, times, and other features are identified by the RTA in coordination with the local communities prior to the implementation year. The current RTA service areas for the neighborhood circulator bus system include the town of Oro Valley, the town of Marana, the Abra Valley area, the town of Sahuarita, the Green Valley area, Casas Adobes, the Rillito area, the Tucson Estates, Drexel Heights, Valencia West, San Javier, Ajo, Y, Cells, and 3 Points. And then the RTA's express service is Oro Valley to downtown and U of A, from Catalina to downtown, from the east side to downtown, from Marana to downtown, from Green Valley to downtown, from Rita Ranch area to downtown, and from the Laos Transit Center to downtown. The express service also has bus routes that provide 2 trips per day. And again, this service has been scaled back since COVID pandemic began. So there's one in the morning and one in the evening now. And there's also 2 trips per weekday on express routes, 103, 105, and 106. And these are currently back to 2 trips a day. And that concludes all of the elements and sub-elements.
Okay, comments on this element. Just a reminder that comments today, for sure, we want to make sure that they're addressed by our subcommittee next week. But also remember that the subcommittee is simply trying to help us as a full committee get to a proper allocation of the funding. And so I want everyone on the committee to still absorb all the information that they can about transit. However, we will have a smaller subcommittee, as we've talked about before, that helps provide us with some context and detail. So comments? I see Patricia.
I have a question. How much of what's allotted here or proposed to be allotted would actually go to just paying to maintain the transit elements that already exist from RTA 1? What is the real number we're talking about here?
I don't have that number. We do have transit staff in the room. Rio, is that something that you can address?
I don't have the exact number, but I know a percentage, roughly speaking, we would need to allocate almost all of RTA next transit funding to maintain current operations. Somewhere in the ballpark of 70 to 80% of RTA Next would go towards just maintenance of the current status quo.
So to understand that 70% needed to keep us at the level that RTA 1 got us to, the remaining 30% would be for enhancement, presumably of that system.
That would be correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Harlan?
based on the last comment, this may be moot, but this entire element is based on the existing service. And where we increase service or try to increase the frequency, et cetera, but none of it addresses the technology things that Bruce was talking about in terms of conversion to autonomous base systems. None of that is forward-looking. It is the same system that we've basically been dealing with since Suntran was created. And that's it. And that's not particularly forward-thinking. So I know we'll discuss this more in the transit subcommittee. So I don't want to make a big deal about it now, but just wanted to raise it from that perspective.
I'm glad you did that. We do want to forward that discussion about technology improvements and electrification or other types of greening of the system to the subcommittee to make inquiries of both Suntran and RTA folks. Bruce.
Yeah, just along those lines, I'm aware that the city of Tucson's been engaged in a pretty comprehensive look at transit options. There was an article in the paper this past week inviting public comment on some of those options. And I don't know if it would be useful either at the subcommittee level or at this level to have the city come in and sort of give us the dimensions and the sort of the different alternatives that they're looking at and what the pros and cons are. I know when we had the city's transit director speak to us recently, talked about, fast lane buses and things of that kind. So I think that would be very instructive to the committee. So I guess I'd request that we invite the city to come in and make a presentation.
Great. Good point. Abby, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Rio de Leon.
Say that again.
Rio de Leon.
Thank you. I appreciate whoever just asked that question and got the answer about the allocation for transit. How do we change how much money we have for the transit sub element? I'm on the subcommittee. That's another 2 hours out of my work day. I don't see the point in talking about it if we have no money to electrify, update, or expand service. I don't understand how this bucket was so small that it's not going to improve or change anything. Who's in charge of that? How do we fix it?
I missed your point. We just heard that 70%.
Having a conversation about the transit sub element if we don't have any money to make any changes to the current system.
No, we have 30% of the 70 of the bucket that is
500
unspent.
million total. That's not enough money to do anything with. So how do we increase that bucket?
Okay, well, let's wait and see what we have as far as input, and the subcommittee will certainly report back to us as well as the rest of the committee talk about that. Thank you. Dale.
A couple things. I very much support Bruce's comment about getting somebody here. The article in the paper the other day, it wasn't paraphrased that way. They're talking that corridor that they're talking about having a special study on is the genesis of the busway, the bus transit proposal that we've been talking about here. And that is a major study. But in addition to that, I very strongly feel we need to have an updates as far as where both Suntran and the city staff are, because they're not necessarily the same, are on in what they think are the things that they are most important to improve to Suntran. That excludes, though, by talking to the city about whether there's elements that need to be dealt with the outlying communities. As you can see from the presentation, there has been not the kind of intensity of transit services that you're talking about in the city, but in the periphery about whether there's some specific things that any of the other cities and towns are looking for. So those are things I think we need to deal with. I'm talking about the agenda probably of the subcommittee here, but those are things we need to deal with there. And I agree, and I'm going to say very flatly, Abby, I mean, the way we do that is if this committee feels that's important, that the committee make a recommendation to the board that that's not an adequate amount of funds. I'm not sure that changes anything, but I think that's something that if you're going to attempt to do so, that's how you go about doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have any doubt that the committee will have its own opinion about what each of those buckets should be worth. But as you say, that is a board decision. We can provide our input after we've examined all of them. There are the comments, Carolyn?
Just a comment, a few things came up today that you said we're gonna have time to talk about, and we're just getting through the definitions today.
Mhm.
And a couple of things I would say is, first of all, for the transit element and the other elements, we're looking at the past here. I mean, I don't think we have too much transit or, anything like that, but I think we really need to be looking at the needs first and then see if they do outweigh the budget that we've been given in different elements. I personally would think that probably all of them, the elements, the categoricals are probably, the buckets are too small, but we don't know that because we haven't heard from what we're asking to do, find out from the city and from Suntran and base it on needs. I mean, things have changed in 20 years, depending not necessarily that we don't want bus frequency, but we might need bus frequency and probably do in areas that we didn't 20 years ago because there are, more people are moving and people are riding the bus, especially now that it's free. But I think we need to do that. What I would ask you, Mr. Chair, is on those things that you say we have time, we don't really have that much time because July is 1st, I think, right? July 1st. That's not, so we should probably try to lay out how we're going to be doing that and not just having an agenda every meeting, and hope it comes, because there's got to be a time where these discussions that keep coming up are placed on the agenda so we have them. Because March is our next meeting. March, April, May, June. That's only 8 meetings.
Oh, we have another meeting this week.
Yeah, that's right.
This
Okay.
month.
But still, I mean, I would say that definitely for the transit element, but I would expand that to all these things we're talking about because we have to have the discussion or we're just going to keep putting it off. It'll be too late.
Yeah, and I think this happened last time also. And that's the reason the transit subcommittee was so important to RTA 1, from my memory, is that they did a lot of the investigation and historical discovery that was necessary for us to, as a committee, act within a time frame. So it's a great comment, exactly what we need to do.
Well, I guess I would ask Paki, what is your plan for the transit subcommittee to get these kind of things started? We've been talking about having Suntran in the city, and Oro Valley has kind of hinted about some things, but other transit providers.
Well, I don't want to get off the agenda, but for the transit subcommittee, we will be inviting members of our transit working group, which include all the operators around the region. And that our staff will be sharing, the buckets again, and going through the sub elements in terms of this discussion that you want to have. So.
Okay. I see we have a comment from Moss, and I think we'll be able to wrap up our meeting then. Moss?
Thanks, Tom. Carolyn, thank you for those comments. I think they're spot on. I just wanted to point out that not only have from RTA 1 has but transit sub element budget allocation decreased by about 5%. This new information about how much would just go to maintaining current service would leave basically the same amount of money left for us to expand transit as the amount of money we're planning to allocate for the RTA kind of admin costs and debt service. And I just think that's really pitiful. I just said, yikes, when I heard that and crunched the numbers. That's given everything in our guiding principles, it's like really focusing on transit expansion. And I mean, you know, like conversations at the city of Tucson about having fare free transit, you know, that's going to eat up that remainder so quickly. And without those elements in there, I just really have no idea how we're going to get City of Tucson voters to buy into this plan. I think if they're estimating for the fare free to cost about 10 million per year, that would just like leave just like little piddle of money left, you know, for, or nothing, frankly, if it's over the next 20 years, to do anything else that would require like adding bus lines or even increasing the frequency further and all these other things that we desperately need, or also just like electrification of our transit system. So I just really encourage the subcommittee to find a number that is actually going to meet our future needs and align with our guiding principles and everything that we need to have done there, because this is wholly insufficient.
Okay, thank you. I apologize, but I think this is the perfect time for me to read the statement from Rachel. I had anticipated doing this a little bit earlier in our conversation about these categories, but I think this is a perfect time. So this is a statement I received this morning from Rachel Wilson. Thank you for allowing us time to talk about the categories. Because I look at mobility as an integrated whole, I do not believe we should have categories. Instead, I believe we should evaluate projects on their own standalone merits. Do these projects align with our guiding principles? And then rank them. This allows for some projects to be combination projects. For example, let's say a particular bus route is going to increase dramatically in frequency of buses. The roads that the bus runs on might need more money for maintenance than some other roads. This will also force us to evaluate each project individually for environmental concerns and safety, instead of pulling those apart. Projects that are great for safety, the environment, and increased mobility will naturally float to the top of the list according to our guiding principles. Equity does not mean geographic equity, everybody gets some projects. Equity means underserved communities get more than communities that have gotten plenty to make up for shortfalls in the past. Thank you, Rachel. All right. Thank you, Rachel, for those comments. We are to agenda item number 6, which is future items for our agenda. And we have been listening and have moved several of these to the transit subcommittee's agenda or list of future agenda items. And if anyone has any specific ones for the full committee, I'm open now. Bruce?
Yeah, so bear with me for a second as I try to set this up. I've been looking at the schedule and what our work to present a plan by July 1st. And then my question is, what is the life of this committee going forward as it goes to public review and so on? And in light of the discussions we just heard about the insufficient funds for transit, it does seem to me there is an open question about whether or not the voters should be asked to increase the amount of the sales tax or the percentage that's given to this. And it would seem to me that one of the tasks that this committee could do after July 1st that could be very instructive would be to put together a list of projects that are critical to the region that cannot be included under the current budget proposals, and to showcase that so the community understands what they can get if they consider additional tax resources. And I think of everything from, expansion of the modern streetcar to completion of the Houghton Road corridor. I mean, you could get a whole series of projects which the community feels are critical. And we could help make the case that those should be considered as this issue of whether the tax should be increased from a half cent to a full cent or 3/4% and so on. So I just raised that as a potential agenda item. Obviously, it may not be relevant until after July 1st, but I would hope we would have the opportunity to have that discussion to identify those additional projects and present them not only to the RTA board, but the community at large. So
I anticipate that when we have to, as an example, reduce the number of projects in the named project category, that we will have some that we really hate to part with and that are very much needed. And I think those, along with discussions about whether there's enough in the transit bucket, et cetera, will provide kind of a formula, if you will, if the committee so wishes, to ask the board to consider a higher number than 0.5%.
I would just further comment that, I think we have operated within, I don't mean in a sort of pejorative sense, a constrained environment in terms of the kind of dollars presented to us by the RTA board for consideration. But I think the community deserves that larger discussion and dialogue before this is completed. So.
Okay, I think that's a valid agenda item.
I agree with Bruce on that. And as I said earlier, in the same context, we are really far behind in this community. So we're behind on roads, we're behind on sidewalks, we're behind on crosswalks, and we're hearing transit a ton. I would like to, if it can be a future agenda item, I'd like to see a data-driven discussion from the transit committee and/or the main RTA board, and let's just take it on head on and find out where we're at in regards to where we're at with transit. I mean, I see congestion. I mean, God, I almost want to challenge this group to see who rode the bus here, right? But we're dealing with a ton of cars and a growing population, and we're talking buses. And if buses is really greater than I think it is, I'd love to see the data on that. I'd love us to have a discussion on it. And maybe we need to adjust the bucket. Maybe we're just so far behind that the half cent isn't enough. And we as a committee need to say, we all had our frustrations. We all went out there. We couldn't make it happen with the budget that we had. And what we came from the RTA CAC is we need a, 3/4 of a penny, or we need the full penny. That might be the bottom line here, because we're all getting frustrated over being behind.
Okay, good, thanks. That's an agenda item. We're not going to be discussing those, but we are going to record them.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind the committee, we can't discuss agenda items. Thank you for bringing these things up, but we can't discuss them.
Right.
Just bring up the topic for future discussion.
Right. We're just defining the topic.
Yeah.
We're fine. Mel.
Thank you. Continuing with that idea, I want to make sure that at the transit subcommittee, we're going to have real information so that we can identify what costs we're doing, why we would do them, as opposed to the prior meetings where we just haven't had any, factual data, studies, real proposals.
Okay, thanks, Mel.
I don't want to discuss it, but I very definitely feel that we need to have on the agenda a recommendation about two things. One is maintenance, and two is whether the half cent is adequate. Obviously, it's not adequate to do maintenance. And I think there are projects that have already been eliminated, not just ones that will be eliminated by that may want to go on that list.
Arlen, did you have an agenda item?
Just briefly, this is not a discussion point. This is building upon when either this committee on its future agenda item or the transit subcommittee hears it. If we are not getting information that is in addition to here's what's going on, here's what we look to see for the future. I want to know what the future all these agencies see for the future. If that's not on there, then I don't know that it's necessarily worth it.
Yep, it better be. Carolyn?
Well, I'm gonna repeat this as an agenda, future agenda item. We continue to see those like larger deadlines that we've seen for a few years now, or however long the board had the latest timeline. But for the next agenda, I'd like to see a like sub deadlines and goals for each of, not just the transit. I think we can do it in the transit committee, and I would also like to see at least a summary of what the transit committee is doing at each of the meetings. I think we already did that, but for the category, the other categories that I assume we're going to be talking about at our big meeting, because there aren't subcommittees, I'd like to see a roadmap as to how we're going to get there and by when, because again, I don't want to just have these discussions that are saved for later. So
Okay.
Yeah, that's what
Good.
I'd like to see on our agenda next time.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good. That will conclude our meeting, and I want to thank everyone for their participation. This was a really good meeting. I think it's messy, and it always is going to be messy until we tie a bow on it. So thanks, and we'll see you again. By the way, our next meeting is not 2 weeks from today, it's 2 weeks from tomorrow. And we'll send out more information about the time of that meeting in the next couple of days. All right.